My name is Doug Peck. I actually grew up in Ashland. I live in Southborough now. I work for a company called Seniors Helping Seniors. We're a home care company, which means we take care of seniors wherever they may live at home in facilities or in their actual own home. And all of our employees are seniors themselves. That's the differentiator. Actually, the average age of our employees is 71. It's a national franchise. I started the franchise in 2011 in Southborough, and I ran it for 6 years by myself, sold it to the Boston office. We've combined the two, and so I actually now work for the guy who's in the Boston office, who's 40 years, almost to the day, younger than me. So a little ironic, but it sort of has started me sort of on this journey to think about aging, because I've worked directly with clients for a number of years. I still do to some extent, and we right now have approximately 235 employees. So we're working with that many clients on a regular basis. So we see seniors, I've seen seniors at all levels of the aging process, people that live in big homes in Weston and in Wellesley, to people who don't have a lot of material resources, how they're aging. And it really got me thinking, about sort of what's ahead for me, and I think for everybody else as well. My background prior to this was in human resources, mostly for technology companies. But what I was really curious about in HR is, why do some employees really do well in a company, and why don't some employees do well? Are there some characteristics of them? So I really did a lot of work looking at that, because I was hiring a lot of people, and obviously you want to hire people who are a good fit, but also have other characteristics that will make them successful for the company. So one of the things I asked myself, when I'm working with other seniors, is why are some seniors seem to be aging well and others not doing it well? And you can really tell. I mean, the people that are really aging well generally are much happier than those that aren't. And I really looked at them very closely, and I've seen them over now the last 13 years. It really doesn't have anything to do with economics. It doesn't even necessarily have to do with your overall health. So that's one of the things that we're going to explore a little bit here. What are some of the things, and what can you do to make sure you're happier, more fulfilled, if you will, as you age? I tell you about my background. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm going to have some things in here that are, are hopefully accurate, but I've vetted this. I've done a lot of these programs, but I want to do this as not something that is a textbook given to you, but for something for you to think about, for something that may jog something in your mind and say, I never thought of it that way, or maybe I should think of something like this, or just get you thinking again about aging. Because I'm going to talk more about this, but I want to, can we see this all right? Okay. It's cut off a little bit when I stand over here. One of the reasons I chose the name Aging on Purpose is, what I mean by that is aging with intent. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk about this. I'm going to talk about purpose in the sort of the normal sense of somebody having a purpose, but I also think this is an opportunity for people as we age to think about how do we want to age? That is really very much in our control. And so it's a time in our lives when we have that opportunity to think about what's ahead. We're not embroiled in the day-to-day of families, children, work, whatever, and can step back a little bit and think about, well, where do we want to go? What do I want to do? So first of all, I want to give you a little bit bigger picture. Really, you, meaning we, since I'm in that category too, we are changing the world whether you know it or not. I know it. We are, sociologists call groups by age cohorts. This is the largest and oldest cohort ever to be on the planet. It's a worldwide phenomenon. Japan is probably the country with the oldest people, not just the oldest, but the largest group of older people. But there's a lot of countries and states even. There's a lot of variety. We have a fairly high population of older in Massachusetts. Even in Southborough, out of a population of roughly 10,000, 2,400 are over 60. That's 24%. That's a very high percentage of the population compared to what it used to be. In terms of numbers, let me see what I have here. So let me go back here. So 1 in 6 people in the United States are over 65. Oh, that's going the wrong way. Come on. Why? 1 in 6? Okay, here we go. That's almost 56 million people in this country. It's almost 1.5 million in Massachusetts alone. But the big factor is how fast this population is growing. Not only we are the largest and oldest cohort, we're the fastest growing cohort in the United States. We're going to see a 38% increase in just 10 years. That's not very long. Matter of fact, in Southborough, we're predicted to go to 30% of the population in the next 5 years. So another figure, just again for you to think about, we have more residents now over 60 than under the age of 20. That's what it means by it affects everything. Think of what it does when, towns now are dealing with more people over 60 than they are in their school system. And those in the school system are growing at best at low single digits in terms of population. And the reason for this, obviously, is that we are all living longer, and one researcher called longevity really the most important event to happen to humans since there were humans. And by important, I think he means there's just a lot going on. We all are living longer now. I think from a lot of what I've read, and when you see things on other TV shows or other articles that you might read, it's going to be very likely that people will soon living to 100 will become pretty usual. And living, your children or grandchildren particularly, may be living to 120 or 125. It's that much of a likelihood in that kind of a near future to be living even longer. And that's even going to have more of an impact on us. So it's had a huge impact on the workplace. My wife taught in Ashland for 25 years. And in the school she was at, an elementary school, they have 30 teachers. She retired a year ago, and she was the only one. This past year, 9 teachers retired. So that's 10 teachers out of 30 in 2 years retiring. A big impact on schools. It has a big impact. There's a lot of businesses around. I have friends who have been rehired on a part-time basis by their former employer because the former employer can't find anybody to do the job. Certainly not as well as the person that they left. And we now have what's called age-friendly workplaces. But every industry and business has been affected. And really every part of society is really going to start to change. And since this has never happened before, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Just like as we age individually, everybody does age individually. We're all at sort of different steps in the process. But we just don't have a good idea what's going to happen to the majority of us when we're 80 or 90, if we're still around, because it just hasn't been done before. And society isn't really quite ready for it yet. As a matter of fact, you've probably heard the term silver tsunami. Have you heard that term? I thought it was a pretty common term, meaning this whole wave of baby boomers that are coming in, silver referring to the color of our natural hair, anyway, that are coming in and are really going to disrupt things. We're going to talk about that term a little bit because it's a really ageist term, meaning that it's a really negative stereotype about seniors. But it just goes to show you that's part of the change, where people are really in some ways afraid of what all these seniors are going to do, and afraid of the impact that we may have on society in general. So we're going to look at the impact on you. Hi. Okay. And we're going to look at a little bit of the impact that the individual has on society. So these are some of my goals that I have for the presentation. For you to think about how you are aging. Think about what's working for you and what's not working for you. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the biggest influencers on how long you live and how happy you will be. And, sort of really try to reframe the whole idea of aging as a time of decline, which is what's really what a lot of people think, whether you're seniors or not. So I'm going to talk about this longevity dividend. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what are the obstacles to aging well before we look at what's possible. Because when I've seen other presentations on aging, they sort of give you a Goldilocks version of it. Everything you can do this, you can do that. But really there are some obstacles in the way, and I think it's best to sort of really talk about them first to understand why it's important to acknowledge them, why it's important to have a strategy to deal with them. So we're going to talk about longevity dividend, we're going to talk about change as an obstacle, and we're going to talk about ageism as an obstacle. So I think of this is how I define the longevity dividend. When I first put this program together, I was thinking of it mostly for people who are maybe within 5 years or so of their 65 or retirement. And it's really kind of changed since then. But if I look at from 65 to 80, or even 85, that's 15 or 20 years. If you think of it in 20 years, that's a really big span of time. That's the time that you spent from grade 1 through college and even more. Or if that's the time you were 30 to 50. That's a long period of time where a lot of things can happen. And I think often we go into this not thinking that far ahead, not thinking about how much time that is and what we want to accomplish during this time. I consider it a gift because we are really living longer. These are sort of extra years. Really, in the beginning of the 1900s, the average age was around 47 or 48, certainly under 50. Yeah, there were a few people that lived longer than that, but for the most part, for the cohort that was that age, they did not live as long. So I see that extra 15 or 20 years clearly as a gift. And frankly, I've had, friends that have not made it as far as this, I'm sure we all have. So I just think it's something very valuable, and that we need to think about how we sort of spend it wisely. Because we're not just living longer, we are really living healthier. We've learned about nutrition, we've learned about exercise, we have a better understanding of cholesterol, heart disease, etc. I mean, I'm standing here today. 5 years ago, I had a heart attack and had, fortunately, again, a stent put in, one of the modern miracles. And I'm, working full time and doing a bunch of other things today that I could never have done. That was one thing that particularly shortened the lives of men not that long ago. Was we were just more susceptible to cholesterol and to heart attack and strokes than women were. We're actually catching up right now. We're really pretty close in terms of the living as long as women, largely because of this. But there was also another really important discovery not that long ago. It's called brain plasticity. Have you ever heard of brain plasticity? What it means is that the brain continues to grow as long as you're alive. They used to think that it sort of filled up and stopped growing. Well, the brain grows by creating new neural connections. And that you have a lot of control over. You can exercise your brain. And two of the most, provided you're challenging it in some way, it's always good to read, to do crosswords, to play Scrabble, or whatever else you're doing. But what you really want to do is to bring some new things in that will challenge you. That's what creates new neural networks. That's what really keeps your brain growing. The two most common ones are learning a musical instrument or learning a foreign language. Last fall, I did this program for the first time for a group in Wayland called the Weston and Wayland Retired Men's Association. It was about 40 guys there. And I had one guy down front who was really excited when I talked about this. He raised his hand and he said, "Hey, I'm 92. 2 years ago, I took up the saxophone. And I love playing it." And he actually brings it in and plays it for meetings at the men's club. And I said, "That's wonderful." And one of the things I want to talk about is to say, how many of us, can imagine ourselves starting to play a musical instrument when we're 90 or learning a foreign language? But I have other seniors who are beginning to learn languages, usually of their where their family is from. It might be Italian, it might be Polish or German, that they heard while they were growing up. They really never spoke it fluently, they just heard it. But now they want to sort of learn it again, and it sort of brings back a lot of memories of times then. And it's a bit of a challenge for them, but it's fun and really important for them as well. I'm not just recommending those two things, but if you see some things around, I was at the Waylands Senior Center not too long ago, actually Weston, and there was a group of probably 25 people in a room almost this size, learning to play banjo. That was a pretty noisy time. But I really credit them to say, again, it's something simple, but it's challenging you and really making your mind work in a different way. So what goes along with these longer years, though, is also the whole idea of change. And that can be hard. Most people don't like to change. They don't adapt well to it. But I will tell you, all the people that I've worked with as an outside person coming in as a caregiver, I had one woman in Weston who was a widow. She had no children at home, but she lived in a beautiful house in a beautiful setting. She actually had a big pond in her backyard. And she was in her mid to late 80s when I first started with her. She hated the idea of change. She was a docent for the Museum of Fine Arts in her younger days. She was a tennis player. She was obviously pretty well off. And now she couldn't do those things. And it really made her angry. And she, in spite of her relatively good health and in spite of having being in a very nice place, she was very unhappy. She really was one of the most miserable clients I've had. She's a really nice person, but she just held on to the fact that all she could focus on was her losses and not what she could do now. And she just hated the idea that she changed into this. And it really just made her miserable for the last few years of her life. It was kind of sad to see. That's one reason I emphasize happiness here. Happy people it really goes a long way to be happy about the little things. It's not necessarily all the big things, but there are things that we can change, and there are things that we just sort of have to adapt to. And I think we have to know what they are. I like this comic. I don't have many cartoons, but it's the caterpillar saying to the butterfly, "You've changed." And the butterfly says, "Well, we're supposed to." Change is built into the system. If you'll pardon the expression, it's not a bug in the system. It's part of our operating processes. But when I look at this, what it reminds me is, the butterfly really, when he looks at the caterpillar, he's not thinking, boy, I wish I was a caterpillar again. He's not thinking that at all. He's thinking about, what can I do to be a better butterfly? I've changed, yes, but I don't want to go back. And I think that's sort of an important lesson for us as we age as well. We are changing. And for some people, I passed out a bibliography. I'll give it to you others that didn't get it too. There are people writing books saying, for some this is a really better part of life because of these changes. And I think that's the whole idea of being adaptable to that is really, really very important. So we've talked about, I just want to watch my time. We've talked about change. We've talked about this whole longevity period. Now I want to talk a little bit about ageism. This is my first definition of it, and it goes back to my caterpillar. Ageism is when you believe your younger self is better than your older self. And I know I've sort of fallen into, that type of thinking sometimes as well, where I say, yeah, I know, I could play tennis much better when I was 50 or even 60, even 70, than I can today. And it really, what happens is it just prevents you from thinking about what's possible for you now. Again, it's like if the 90-year-old that I met with the saxophone, if he had that thinking, he would have never picked up the saxophone to play it. We'd be missing out of a whole lot of things. you know. And ageism is always negative stereotypes about aging itself. We all have them. This society really values the new over the old. And we've heard that our entire lives. And so we really have begun to internalize a lot of it. So it's why I spend a little bit of time on it, because I really want you to think about when do you think of, when do you say ageist things to yourself? Because it's a lot about self-talk. And, just even, I've done it myself, walked into the kitchen and said, what am I here for? Oh, that's a senior moment. I hear it all the time. I get called out a lot. I belong to a men's group in Southborough called the Dull Men's Club. And we have a good time every Friday. But I do call people out when they tell ageist jokes. I'm also going to show you why that's the case, because it really has big negative effects on a lot of things that you do. Because aging is really a mental process, not just a physical process. Aging is our mental maps. They're sort of pictures in our head, stories that we tell ourselves about how people will behave and what they can and cannot do. So when you think of an 80-year-old person, what do you think of? Do you think of someone who's going to run the marathon as an 80-year-old marathoner, in Hopkins starting off? Or do you think of somebody who uses a walker or a cane, or has some physical difficulties, or senility at that point? What do you imagine? What do you think about for yourself? Another little story about me. When I turned 70, I'm 77 right now. When I turned 70, I wanted to try a new exercise program. I've been pretty active all my life. I started yoga back when it was coming in the early to mid 70s, and I've done different ones. And I play tennis, I ride a bike, I do this sort of, but I really wanted something that sort of upped the intensity a little bit at 70. And my wife and kids thought I was a little bit crazy. I took up a martial art called Krav Maga. Has anybody ever heard of Krav Maga? It's not strictly a martial art, but it's the Israeli Defense Forces self-defense course. And where I took the instruction, they also did what's called Muay Thai kickboxing. It's Thai kickboxing. So it's very physical. You're punching people, you're throwing them on the ground. Of course, you have gloves and everything on. Or you're learning kicks, etc. I was sweating bullets every time I went. And I was probably average 40 to 50 years older than anybody else in the place. And my wife said, you're going to get hurt, etc. But I approached it. I talked to the owner and the instructor beforehand, and there's nothing special for me. I was just very careful. I was in pretty good physical shape, and I loved it. Talk about having to learn balance. We talk a lot about balance as we age. You try to kick somebody who's moving away from you with one leg, you better have good balance. Or if you're ducking a punch, you better have good balance, or you're going to be flying over. Anyway, I did it for over 2 years until COVID came, and because it would involve so much sweat and grappling everybody else, it was not for me. So I'm still looking at it as kind of a substitute for that right now. But I say that only because to say I really could picture myself doing that. I said, I'm going to try it, and if it doesn't work out, right, no harm, no foul. It's just me doing it. But I really, really got a lot out of it. But it was only because I had a belief that I should at least try it. I was at least competent enough to try it. it's a belted system. I got 8 belts, by the way, in that time period. So I was moving along. So everyone has these preconceptions, and we've grown up with them, we've internalized them. But one of the things I'd like you to take away is to think a little bit about, so what are my preconceptions about aging? What are my conceptions about somebody who's 70 or 80 or whatever age you are as you're going forward? And is that sort of stopping me from trying to do anything? Outside of the physical side of things, I have a very good friend who's now in his early 80s. He was an engineer for a lot of different places for a long time. But he took up poetry about 5 years ago, and he's written quite a bit of poetry, and he belongs to these poetry groups. Good thing he's a night owl. All over the globe. There's one in Australia, there's one in Japan. Sometimes I'll text him in the morning. He says, I'm not getting up, I just went to bed at 2 o'clock because I got off my poetry thing. But I was so surprised because he's got a real technical engineering background. And that's not usual for somebody who's going to write poetry. He writes a lot of what's called haiku poetry, that's short Japanese style poetry. He's really very good at it, and he's been published in a lot of these online journals and some other things. But again, I give him a lot of credit because it was a really big shift for him, but something that right now he really, really loves to do. There's another kind of ageism, however, and this is society telling you things all the time. That basically, as we age, your opinions don't matter. You're irrelevant. You're really invisible. And you're really, how useful are you really? And I have one more personal example of that. I'm the chairperson of the Council on Aging in Southborough. Not this past summer, the summer before, I had been gone for quite a bit. And in Southborough, we have either, you can pay for trash pickup, or we have a transfer station that we go to, and you have to buy a sticker for the transfer station. Well, one of the benefits of turning 65 is you got the transfer station stickers for free, which everybody looked forward to. It was a nice little perk. So my wife went in, I drove the car, she went in to pick up the stickers. They were due on the 1st of September, and she came back outside and she said, they want $40 for the sticker. And I said, no, that can't be right. She said, yeah, it's right. I've asked her 3 times. They've changed it. They're charging everybody everybody over 65 for that, $40. So I was a little upset. I went to see the director of the senior center. That was a Saturday the following week, and she said, yeah, you know what, they never told anybody this. They just decided to, raise the amount on it, not be it for free anymore. It had been 10 years anyway that I know of that it was for free. I thought it was not the right thing to do. So in my position, I had not met yet, but I knew who the chairman of the select board was and the vice chairman. And I said, I really would like to have lunch with you. We went to the local spa, had lunch with the vice chairman first, with the chairman first. And I said, what's with this, after we had breakfast, what's with this charging senior stuff? And it turns out, he says, well, we thought that you seniors could afford it. Most of the seniors in Southborough are pretty well off, big houses, etc. I don't have a big house. But anyway, so that's first of all, a big stereotype on stereotyping all seniors. And I said, well, that may or may not be true. I delivered a lot of meals in Southborough, so I know there are some bigger pockets than people like to think that are having a difficult time. But I said, what you really did was make all of us feel that we're invisible, that our opinion were irrelevant. And it really kind of stopped him in his tracks. And he said, that wasn't our intention. I really hadn't thought about it. I said, I know, that's the problem with this kind of ageism. It's sort of invisible. It's part of your subconscious. You don't really think about it. You just say, okay, they can afford it. we don't have to tell them, but they would have asked anybody else. I'm convinced if they were going to another group, they would have announced it, would brought it up and talked about it a little bit. And they didn't do it here. The good news is I got to tell, and I asked them, so how many seniors do you think are in Southborough? They had no clue. They're our select board. So it was a chance for me to give them a good education. I actually went to a select board meeting last night, gave them a similar education on seniors, and everybody is really much more on our side and more aware of seniors and the number of seniors in Southborough than they were before. So it's a good story, but it's also a good example of ageism. And that's why I bring it up, because it is all around us. And you have to really sometimes think about it or just be aware of it, because it does really affect you. And this is how it affects you. This is the first book on my list. Her name is Becca Levy, and she wrote a book. I'll get you one. I just don't want to bring my wire over there that far. Called Breaking the Age Code. And she's done very long-term studies on aging. And she says the single most important factor in determining how long you will live is not just your gender, income, or social background, or even your health. It's how you think about and approach the idea of aging. She did some recent tests, some sort of short-term ones. She took a group, split them in half of older adults, and she gave one group, she did a memory test on them, and then sort of a walking test, because you can tell a lot about a person's gait, particularly as they get older, from how they walk. She gave one group 10-minute subliminal messages on positive aspects of aging. Subliminal means you really can't hear it, but your brain is picking up these cues about aging. Half of it got positive, half got negative. And then she retested them. This is 10 minutes. The people that got the positive messages tested better on the test, and actually their gait was better. They walked straighter, etc. Then the negative people showed just the opposite, that they did worse on the test, and their gait was also impacted. That was just 10 minutes listening to negative information. So it's really more powerful than what you think, or what a lot of people think. And really, other ways it affects you is that, with positive, thoughts about aging, they recover better, they walk faster, they live longer. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And they also remember better. I mean, one of the best things you can do to prevent or slow down dementia, we don't really know what causes Alzheimer's, but there is more and more evidence is to talk about eating healthy, exercising, and also exercising your brain. That's really very important. So I quote a couple people in my thing, not too many. This is William James, is sort of the father of modern American psychology. And he simply says, people by and large become what they think of themselves. And again, I bring up the ageism thing because it's so prevalent in our society, and we often fall back and think, maybe it's because of my age. Maybe it's, I just can't do this. And I really want people to be aware about that, because it affects us psychologically, it affects our behaviors, and it affects us biologically. By that I mean, elderly, you probably have seen some, have low self-esteem. Some people say, I feel ashamed to be old, because society tells me that it's shameful. One of the things when I've given this a number of times, if I ask people their age, so how old are you? I always see a lot of people sort of hesitate before they tell me my age. Am I going to tell them my real age, or am I going to cut off a year or two? You know, try it, and I ask people. You know, not in the senior center, but out in the street, they're not going to tell you what their real age is, for the most part. The ones that do, almost all the time are truthful, are 90 years old or older. They are very, very proud of that. I'm 92, I'm 93. I've had a lot of people. I had a woman in this class when I was in Brookline who was 102. And they're very proud, and they should be. But a lot of us prior to that are saying, I don't want them to know I'm 80 or 79 or whatever, you know? Senior moments again. But we also, if you think negatively about yourself, it's really easy to develop these fatalistic habits. We don't exercise as much or as often as we should. We don't take all the medications if you're on medications that you do. We don't eat as healthy because the idea is that, look, inevitably we're going to endure some declining health. So sort of what's the point? And ageism can have people thinking that consciously and subconsciously. Did I miss one thing? No, that affects up here. Okay. So going back, research has shown that longevity is impacted up to 80% by a person's choices, and I think also a strong sense of purpose. Purpose is sort of how we get meaning and joy in our daily lives. It's really about not necessarily having this one great big thing called a purpose that you have. It's really about a journey, doing something that you love, doing something for others that you feel fulfilled from. You feel that you're still here for a reason. And I think that's really important to have that sense. And I think now it's also a time, I'll talk about a little bit, where you can sort of direct that. It's not, you have the opportunity to think, so what do I want to do? But it changes over time as well. It's dynamic. What you might think of and feel purposeful for you when you're 70 or 75, probably going to change when you're 80 or 85. It's something that's always going to be an ongoing thing. It grows as we grow. It also helps connect people to a community. You know, I used to, honestly, I did this, before I worked a lot in this group, I used to kind of, my mother was a knitter or a crocheter, you know, and she didn't belong to any big clubs all the time, but when she did, I used to poo-poo it. Now it's a knitting club. It's very important type of social connection that she made by doing those kind of things. She would crochet every night watching TV while she could. She had macular degeneration, so it really got hard for her to do. But she would pack up her crocheted squares and send them to the Salvation Army. They would make Afghans out of them. And, you know, that made her really feel good. I could see the stack of squares growing. Then we'd take them and pack them up and send them off. That you may think that's a little kind of purpose, but that's a really big purpose, depending on where you are. Another way to think about purpose is not to say, what do I want to be when I grow old, but who do I want to be? What are my values right now? Not what they were in the past, but what do I value now? I think part of our purpose is to find a life that is meaningful and can make a positive contribution to the world, whatever it might be. So you can ask yourself, these are kind of two good questions to ask yourself. One is, so what can I do to grow? and the other was, what can I give? Because I think giving is a very important part of the aging process. I'm going to skip this a little bit. What do I love to do? What's my legacy? Or how can I best use my gifts to help someone else or contribute to others? I want to skip these a little bit. This is something that I really like. Few people can change the world, but everyone can change someone's world. And this is my other famous philosopher, American philosopher, Dr. Seuss. He says, to the world you may be one person, but to one person you may be the world. And I've seen that time and time again in the business that I'm in, where one person can make such a difference to another person. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a big deal. Just a small example of this for myself, and while it's small, this happened like 5 years ago, and I remember it so clearly. I go to a lot of networking meetings for people that are involved in the senior community, lawyers, all kinds of folks. And there's usually like 50, 60 people at some of these breakfast meetings. And one morning, it was up early. I was just sitting sort of by myself at a table, drinking coffee, and not sort of feeling myself. And a woman who I say hello to, I shake her hand all the time, but don't know her all that well. She came over to me and sat down, and she says, you don't look like your usual self today. What's going on? I'm saying, I said, no, I'm really okay. I'm just a little, you have one of those days. She says, well, look, if there's anything I can do, please let me know. And she stayed and talked to me for a couple minutes. And I said, I never realized that she even noticed what I looked like. I mean, what my normal person was. But she did, and she came over. She didn't have to, didn't know me that well, to say, hey, what's wrong? If I can do anything to help. For me, that was a really big thing. It still sticks with me today. I can remember it so well. And I just think it's all those little kinds of things that people can really easily do that really can make a big difference. I work a lot with social workers. And I had one who was working in a assisted living facility, and she told me, it was a small place. She said, every day I go in, I make it a point when I come in to give every person I see a compliment. Even if it's like, oh, I love your earrings today, or I love your dress, or is that, whatever it might be. And she said, I would always see them just perk up a little bit, and it's a good way for everybody to start the day. She felt good about it because you do feel good about it, and they felt good about it as well. This is my last quote from this other famous American philosopher, Muhammad Ali. He says, service to others is the rent you pay for your room on earth. And I really, really believe that's the case. And again, it doesn't have to be a big service. Sometimes it's just the little ones that count. But doing it every day really gives you a feeling that you're here for a reason. It gives you a connection to the person. It gives you a feeling of significance, helps you sort of solidify your identity and feel that, you matter, and you're making a contribution. It's never going to be huge. But again, to one person, you really may be their world, or it really has a big impact on their world. I'm going to skip over here. We're running late. So what does service to others mean? You make a connection with somebody. And right now, our Surgeon General has said we're in a loneliness, particularly among both teenagers as well as adults, is really a social issue. It's a social health issue. It affects you as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day has a negative effect on your health. Loneliness and isolation has that kind of a negative effect on your physical health. And by the way, the answer is 7.5. Oh, the question? So how much longer will you live with positive attitudes as opposed to negative attitudes? The answer is 7.5 years. Again, according to this one study by Peck, actually one book by her. So it's not an insignificant number by any stretch of the imagination. So for a little self-reflection, think about what part of everybody has different attitudes. What part of your current attitude do you think is an asset? What do you think is a liability for you at this point? Can you think about what beliefs about aging, about what you can or can't do that are holding you back from doing something that you really would love to try? What are you grateful for? When was the last time you did something for the first time? Even something small, something different. I mean, when we talk about change, one of the best ways to start adapting to change is to change a little bit at a time yourself. Do something small. Do it incrementally. It may be small steps, but it's going to get you used to changing. Staying in your comfort zone, particularly as we age, not doing anything, not meeting new people, not trying new things, is honestly an early death sentence. And ask yourself truthfully, are you getting happier or unhappier? Do you feel more fulfilled this year, at the end of this year, whenever you want to make that calculation, or less fulfilled? And lastly, what are you going to do about it? Again, sometimes that we may feel that we get overwhelmed by all of these things, but you just do something a little bit at a time, one at a time. And lastly, when I put this up, a lot of people say, age joyfully, is that really possible? Well, I think it is. Does everybody know what a trigger is? Have you heard what a trigger is, a psychological trigger? It's like when you're driving and somebody cuts you off. That's a trigger. It usually triggers some language and gestures and something negative. There's a lot of negative triggers around us all the time. We don't have to stop and become aware of them because we're just really attuned to live that way by, it's a self-defense mechanism in some regards. But there's also something now that psychologists call a glimmer. And a glimmer is the opposite of a trigger. My best example is this. I had a client who had dementia, and we used to go walking once or twice a week. And he lived in Framingham. We would go to the Natick Mall usually because the surface is pretty flat. We would get there early and with nobody around. So we could walk and we could talk and we'd have to worry about the weather. But the other group that was there were usually mothers pushing little babies in strollers, before the crowd started. And oftentimes the ones that were like 1 or 1.5 or 2, they let out of the stroller because there's nobody else in the place. And the kids would go running down the hallways there. And my guy, every time he saw one, his face would just light up. He would just change completely by looking at that little kid. And I said, that's a glimmer. Something good, something joyful that's happening to you. But you have to stop sometimes to recognize it because we pass over those. So I encourage you to think of these little things that when you see them do bring you joy. It may be just somebody holding the door for somebody else or somebody helping another person out. But they're out there. And I think it helps everybody to live a little more joyfully, to begin thinking that there is this joy in the world. It's not all negative. You just have to go. It's a little bit harder to look for sometimes. So that's my spiel.